Hello and welcome all to today's video. My name is Joseph. I hope everyone's doing well today. So in today's video I was asked by Zine on how to create a options UI menu. The best thing I could think of was the Mass Effect kind of UI menu. So as forewarning, this is a little bit more complicated than previous videos, so just be prepared for that. I'm just giving you forewarning. Before I get into the video, a big thank you to everyone on the channel. You guys are all amazing. You have no clue. So let's get into this madness. So what I think Zine was asking for, and let me know if I'm wrong, Zine, because I'm more than happy to make another video, is this here, for example. So in the sense of making a UI menu. Now, again, a lot of my videos are stripped down just so I can get this stuff out quick to you guys. So, like, you can set your own sprites, and I'm making some assumptions you guys know how to do that. So this here is just using some very basic sprite stuff, animations. So if I click on any of these options, except exit because it will kill the system, I'll show you, like that. The other two will freeze, because there's no programmed action to go forward. When I say freeze, the game's not frozen, it's just stuck, waiting for the next command. Let's get into a little bit of how this works, and there's two parts to this. Now, I've written this mostly dynamically, meaning that we can do some really fun things with it. So this is the program to the controller, and I'm going to run into the same problem again, not enough screen space. Yo-yo games. Let me just quickly do that. Let's maximize as much as we can. So, what I've done here is you'll see that I've got my favorite arrays as always. But I've got a button count, button distance, so that just sets how many buttons to display and the distance they are away from the center circle that I've drawn using just a draw function. The next one is my button select. That is important because that tells the system what to do, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Then I've just got the standard text to display on the buttons, exit, high, and beans, just for the fun of it. And then I've got an array button ID create. That's important because I need to store all the IDs so I know how many objects I've created and what I'm managing with, and clean up at the end when I'm deleting things. So I run it through a for loop. The for loop does some very basic things. The first step is it does each step always adds into the button ID array. So the first step adds itself. Then I'll do an instance create depth. I do X, add a length direction X, which is just my direction I've set. 360 divide button count times I, which just basically will mean if I've got 2 buttons, it's 180. Basically, because I've got 360 divide 2. Then I times that by I, which means then for my first step, which I is 0, so it will be 0, then 1 is 180. And then plus 90 just reverts it back to the correct position. Y is the same thing. And then my last, come on Gamemaker, you're not making my life easy. Let me bring it over this way. And then my last step is I select my depth, which I still haven't worked out how that works, by the way. I'm still working my way through how Gamemaker's changed those. And then my create, which is just the object wheel UI button. My next function is the master ID, so I hand over my own object's ID that's creating it back to my UI object so it can report back. Then I basically just assign a action to my UI button I've just created, which is I plus 1, which is then how we can work out what action is to take based on what button I click. So exit, for example, is assigned as 1, high is assigned as 2, beans is assigned as 3, because 0 is our default call. So we don't use 0 because we use it as a reference point. You could do -1, for example, as well. The last step is I set depth. For some reason, this time it worked. The last time I've played with this, it hasn't liked me and broke. Don't ask. I'm going to just deal that it's working. And then my last step is I build a little error function in to make sure that I don't exceed my text array. So if I've got 5 or 6 buttons, but only 2 entries of text, I don't get an error out, I still see the buttons. So that's step 1. I'll show you the destroy function. So all the destroy function does, it's a for loop, so when destroy gets called, it runs through any coding in here to do cleanup. All this does is it looks at the array button count and it runs through the array and cleans itself. So with array button ID I, so it just means it will go through the whole array and it will clean all its instances. Plain and simple, nice and clean. The step function, so this is where that callback, the button select, becomes important. So this button select will dictate which action occurs. As you can see, so if it returns as a 1, it will exit. If it returns as a 2, do action. If it returns as a 3, do an action. So because I've not programmed these, it's not going to do much. For example, if you wanted to have this action occur, you could go do action and make sure to include the function, if you don't want to display your thing anymore, instance destroy, and I'm going to be totally blind right now. Instance destroy. So with each of these actions, you should always make sure to include the destroy function, because that will then trigger the destroy, which will then do a clean, unless if you're planning to do something else. The last step is a draw event, and there's literally nothing fancy about that. It's just drawing a circle. So that's step 1. The second part to this is the button itself. So in the button, I've got a few bits of code. So I've got the master ID, which gets called dynamically when it gets generated. I've got a text input. I've got a button selector again. This is internalized, meaning it's its own little system. And then I've got a button action. So button action gets assigned in the create and gets assigned based on I. So that's when it returns and tells this button action, or sorry, button selection, what output it needs to perform. So if I scroll back down here, you'll see, and this is where things get a little bit crazy. I've also got just two select colors here for my text, which is just using the make color RGB, which is black and white. So the way this works here, and like I said, it gets a little convoluted because there's a bit of passing in or backwards and forth between objects. So we've got var master ID, which refers back to my controller, and it looks at the button select. If it's not seen anything selected, it's going to run through this first section of code. The first section of code looks at my mouse position, which then allows me to pull a dynamic position, so I don't need to use a mouse click. Oh, sorry, mouse click or anything. I can just pull the ID straight up. From there, I draw my sprite with a sprite index of 0. And then I draw text. And the text, what I do is what we call massage the data a little bit. So I take the string width, which is how long the text is. I take the text value, I divide it by 2 to find its center, and I do the same thing with the height. So then that way I can center the text. The next part is you'll see a bunch of var button text color inactive, which is just the color I set. It makes me set it 4 times. I wish I had one where I can just put one entry. The last step is setting alpha, which is set to 1 because I want it to be non-transparent. So if the first statement is true, not true, it will draw a plain button inactive. Else, if button ID returns itself, it jumps to the second stage, which draws a grayed out version. So you'll see here that I've stepped to sprite 2, and it's the same action again, except this time I'm drawing the active text color, which is white. And then what I can do is inside there, in this else statement, look for the mouse click. Because I know the mouse is over my object, I can then click and know I'm clicking on that object. And then this is where I can look at so I'm looking back at the master controller, again, where it says var button select. If it's equal to 0, I can then say take action, so I can say button select, so this is internalized. 1, which tells the system that it's now active, or the internalized button that it's active. And I can set the master's button select to the button action I assigned it at creation. I hope that makes sense. The next step is, now that the top criteria in this statement is no longer true, so it's no longer equal to 0, we jump down to the bottom statement here, which basically looks at our internalized button selection. So if it's 0, it will return white, and if it's 1, oh, if it's not 0, I should say, it will return grey, meaning selected. So if we look at that back in action again, you'll see, if I click on high, deletes itself because I put in the function. If I reload it, beans sits there frozen. And then if I go to exit, it will exit the program. So basically all that's doing is passing information back and forth to the controller, and the controller's making a decision. So the other way you could do this here is use globals. I'm not a massive fan of that. Don't ask why. But basically, you could attach globals in here as well. So that's a basic UI wheel. I'm hoping that's what you're looking for, Zine. If it's not, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Again, I just want to say a big thank you to you all. You are massively amazing. You have no clue. I'm shocked at how fast the channel's grown this year. And you guys are to blame for that one, and I thank you. So I will see you guys next time. Make sure to stay safe. And yeah, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Also, before I forget, this will be up in the Google Drive. Talk to you later.